This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:07 at WPSL 1590. The talk of the Treasure Coast. You're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shavir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And I'm going to try this and see if that works. Yay.
You're building a mountain
I
over
am
there.
slowly changing things. Yep. Well, I'm actually somebody turned me on to something new, and I'm going to see how it works. But a different camera system.
Oh.
There seems to be, for the folks who've tried to listen for the last 2 weeks and have gotten yeah, it's a really weird noise. That is a glitch in posting from the tablet on Facebook Live. Not on the phone and not on my laptop. But
the tablet.
But the tablet.
How old's the tablet?
Not that old, and you know, it's one of those stories if somebody needs to sync a couple of updates to, I'm sure, to each other. There's just a handshake that's not working.
Oh, updates. The bane of our existence.
Yeah. Well, you know, everybody's got different software, and so they change what everything's doing, and you know, they don't always catch everything. It's the story of life. Technology moves ever faster. Every couple of years you have to update the technology. You have to change what's going on. And if you don't, you get lost in the dust.
Well, you've got like a phone right in front of you.
Yeah.
And a tablet. We have found, our chief engineer found a piece of gear basically that will replace my audio board that I use for IRSC. Mm-hmm. And it's like a little tiny thing with a couple of microphone inputs for my headset mics, and that board will be gone. and so I can put everything in a backpack now rather than a full case.
There's some new streaming technology that's out there that we're going to be looking at that you can control from a phone or a tablet. You can make a remote mic out of your phone and things like that.
Oh yeah.
So we're going to be looking at some of that, and hopefully that will stay more in tune with.
Yeah,
because you've got moving targets on both sides, folks.
Sure.
That's part of the problem.
Oh yeah.
So a shout out to Jim, who said, Rabbi, you need to say the number more often for people. And yep, it's up there, right? And that's 772-340-1590. So if you'd like to call in.
And if you're listening in Iceland, you need to dial the area code.
And I'm getting a message here that says, yay, we can hear you. And that's because I'm using my phone and not my tablet to stream.
There you go.
And I'm sure that it will catch up and it will be fixed.
And I'll bet your phone is stronger.
Depends on the relative age of the tablet and the phone, and I'm trying to remember which one came when. Because this is actually not the first 7S. I'm still using a 7 Plus or a 7 whatever. That I got a few years ago. I haven't upgraded because I'm waiting for the fancy cameras to get into my price range. If anybody'd like to do a crowdfunding and help me get
the brand new
get
12.
one of the pros, I would certainly not
go.
turn that down. And using the tab, it just became a problem the last couple weeks. If you look back, you'll see it's there. But after that, and we ran into that at the temple. That was actually a piece of it. Because the main computer that needed to stream needed some updates, so it wouldn't stream. So we went to the backup, which has always been my tablet, and it went. So then we went to my phone, and of course, since I use my phone like crazy, especially on Fridays when I don't, if I get some downtime, I'll recharge it during the day. But I didn't get any downtime last Friday, and so it didn't get recharged, and it lasted part of the service.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh, the technology was a circus last week.
A test.
Oh, yeah, because then the people scrambled to get a cord. And that's actually why I got this particular stand that you see the phone sitting on.
Yeah, that's cool.
And that's because it allows you to put the charger cord.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, you can plug it right
Yeah.
into the extension cord.
And we've
here
got
on
one
the-
of these
on the
stands
desk.
that lives at the temple and one that I carry for here. So,
Very cool.
it holds the phone in a much better position. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I got to get you to put your pilot's hat on.
Okay. What do you need for my pilot's hat?
Would you fly with Jeff Bezos and his spacecraft?
Oh, would I fly in a spacecraft?
What do you?
What? Okay, ask the question.
No, I just say what what are your feelings on that? Would you really want to do that?
If I were actively flying, it would probably be a different question, because a
Okay.
different answer right now.
No, I
I'm
get
not
it.
current. Flying is, to me, it's a spiritual experience. There's a reason why it says we have slipped the surly bonds. Right? There's just an at-one-ment with the universe when you're flying, but not when you're flying in traffic and all those other times. Right, so there's lots of really pithy sayings that pilots have, like, it's better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground.
Oh, well, it's interesting because you hear the astronauts talking about the view of Earth.
Yeah, that's got to be
From the space
spectacular.
station.
That's got to be spectacular.
Yeah.
One of the things we've touched about different things. One of the things that the Israeli Air Force has a habit of doing is taking young pilots and at night sending them up for a night shot so they can see the bright light of Israel and all of the electricity versus all of the desert around it.
Sure.
And it's an emotional hit.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. You just look at the progress versus desert.
Desert, yeah. And, And, again, if you look at, say, China, you'll see that most of the light is along the cities, which are along the coasts, and with little populations, which are not small, like Wuhan. Wuhan's not a back roads kind of town, folks. It's a major industrial academic center of China.
There's several million people there.
Yeah, there's millions of people there. And there's universities, and there's research centers, and there's trade centers, and there's all kinds of things. It's a very pretty city. We don't see much about it because nobody knew the name Wuhan until COVID came out. But I shouldn't say nobody. Obviously,
you
if you
mentioned
did trade.
it years ago on this show, talking about the trade routes.
The ancient trade, the Silk Road.
Silk Road.
Right, which was neither a road nor made out of silk, but
Yeah.
But what it refers to is the routes, the trading routes that started very early because people needed to trade. They didn't have the mobility that we have today. And then, like today, the goods travel more than the people who trade them.
Yeah.
Right, because the caravan drivers would drive a certain distance, then sell and trade, and then come back and go back and forth because they wanted to come home once in a while too. Right, one of the big differences in that is the story of Marco Polo, who spent 14 years in China before taking spaghetti or Chinese noodles back to Italy.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Stick that dagger in.
I love spaghetti too.
Spaghetti not invented by the Italians. How terrible. Oh.
Yeah. And then there's pizza. Never mind.
Don't go to Italy for pizza, believe me.
Go to New York for pizza or
there
Chicago.
you go. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. It's the Italian Americans. All right. And we tend not to realize that, but the Silk Road was both sea routes and land routes that the goods traveled, and they went all the way from far east to far west. And the routes go up through Europe, and they go down through Africa and over through Asia, that whole chunk of the world. And that's the piece that Columbus didn't think the world was flat. He was looking for a short route to get to the other side of China, because he didn't want to have to keep going. They didn't have a Suez Canal backed up or not. Right? They used to have to go down around the Horn of South Africa to get back up to China on the other side, or they had to use one of the land routes across India and Arabia and into the Mediterranean.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a reason why the Suez Canal was created, and the reason for Panama, right? Because that's another horn that people used to have to go down. Right? It's money. Time is money. Right? And some goods are perishable.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And they didn't. Nowadays, what they do with fruit and produce is almost. It's so sad, right? They pre-pick it so early, and do these weird things so that it arrives at the market in some state right before, it's ripe and before it's going to rot, because sometimes you can't catch that sweet moment of ripe between buying it in the store and rotting. Mm-hmm. I've experienced that. You buy produce and you put it on the counter or on the fridge, depending, and before you can eat it, it's
gone. Oh yeah. That happens quite a bit.
So, in those days they would pick fruit pretty close to when it was ripe. You could pick a mango a week or two before it would be ripe. But if it took you 3 weeks to get to England from Asia, those mangoes would be gone. Right. So produce has always been a perishable item. Animals, of course, were moved living and would be handed off that way.
Right. I got to ask you, your education in Israel.
Yeah.
How valuable was that to you in your life now, if you will?
Okay, how valuable was my time of study in Israel? And I studied at the Hebrew University, which is an amazing university. And I have very fond memories of sitting out in the grass studying, because they didn't have fire ants.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, small favors, and it was a well cared for sod. I think it was invaluable, just as I think that the military experience of seeing more of the world was invaluable, because it's important to see how other people live and what other cultures are. And one of the things that I think about quite often, and it's changing in the Middle East, which was that when I was there, back when maybe not the dinosaurs, but, it feels kind of
Were there automobiles? No, I'm not gonna.
Okay. So there's this unit I use when I teach English. Says, were there automobiles in the past? No, there weren't. And of course, then the question becomes, when is the past? Is it 100 years, 200 years, or 500 years ago? And technology, of course, is very different. But when I was in Israel, in the Middle East, you didn't look at somebody in the eye. That was to accuse them of lying. Whereas here in America, it's just the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you avert your eyes, you're accused of lying. And I lived in Israel for a year, and so I learned to avert my eyes and not challenge people.
Wow.
Yeah, you look.
Weird.
You look at somebody like this, and I'm looking at you now. So you kind of look at somebody so you can see them, but not an eye to eye. Right? There's an eye to eye lock.
Right.
That we do. And it connects different parts of our brain, and they've learned, or through their culture, that they don't do that, because now it's changing because of the East-West mix and movies. Movies have a profound influence. Movies and TV shows.
Really?
That get exported. We are packaging American culture in our TV shows and in our movies. And
wow. Okay.
And I see the difference. I haven't been to Israel in a while, and it's one of the things that I do want to do, but I'm pretty sure, based on the Israelis that I've met here and the Palestinians that I've met here, that culture is shifting, that it's becoming more eye to eye. And those are things that are subtle. that are within our culture. So I think it was very important for me to do that. It was very important for me to have a British next door neighbor. I was talking with our classes started, Summer B started this week at IRSC, and I'm back in the classroom. It felt really strange. As I walked in, I looked at the students and I said, so this is my first time back on campus in over a year since the shutdown, March of 2020. This is my first time back.
And it probably was for the kids, too.
Well, some of them may have had a hybrid class or in Summer A.
Okay.
Okay, so there were some hybrid classes in Summer A. But, yeah, for me, it was the first time back. And I was like, how does the tech work? And so I was talking with my new students, and the first class is always fun because one of the big things that I do the first semester is totally rattle them. We've had some of the discussion. Yeah, what do you know, right? And if you don't know anything, then what's capital T truth? And is it constant? Does it change? And, so a couple of the quotes that I love, Pope John Paul, coming out of Vatican II, made the statement, it is not that the gospel has changed, it is that we have begun to understand it better.
Oh.
Yeah.
I never heard that one.
Yeah.
Huh.
It's a great quote. It's in my religion class, but I also use it in my philosophy class because it's an important way of looking at things, because sometimes change is really hard. Why is that? Because if we want to be right, we want to be correct, we want to know something, well, then if it's different next week, then we really didn't know it. Right? So we weren't right, which attacks our individual needs to be right, to be certain, to be, all of those things.
Right.
And the reality is that we really don't know anything. We've agreed to things, and those agreements change.
So how many students do you have in your first class?
It's 30-some students in that class.
Okay.
And we're using a big lecture hall, and they are spaced, and they're not. And that was really the hardest thing. I am a walker as I talk, and ironically, I use it in part to keep an eye on those computers in the back because, students sometimes drift and.
Oh, you mean all the Facebook pages?
Whatever they're doing in the back there. Whatever they're doing in the back.
They're probably not on Facebook anymore.
They aren't. They're probably on Snapchat or Instagram or one of the other programs that are out there. But so I couldn't walk and I couldn't do all those things. But the other point that I make to them, this is a long-winded way of getting around to what I was going to say, is that I share with them the story. I asked them, this was interesting, folks. Who is Benedict Arnold? And not one hand went up, which was kind of interesting.
Oh, I guess we need some civics taught here.
Well, I was like, have you had U.S. history yet, maybe?
Like in the 4th grade?
Well, who knows? Anyway. Oh, and you know this from having been in the Southwest. You learn U.S. history differently in the Southwest than you learn it here on the East Coast. And so I actually had them Google Benedict Arnold and see who he was and what he did, and so that they he's a traitor to America and da-da-da. And the reality was he was a loyalist to the British. That people were British citizens. We were in the middle of a revolution. And this became really apparent to me when I lived in Israel. That's the connection. Because I was talking to my neighbor from Britain.
Okay.
And we became friends during the year I was there. And I happened to turn to, we were doing something, and I said something to her about, well, I didn't want to be a Benedict Arnold. And she looked at me and said, what's the problem with that?
He's a buddy of mine. Oh.
Well, he was a loyalist, right?
Yeah.
If you're British,
yeah.
He was a loyalist. He did what he had sworn to do, which was to defend the crown. And
that's funny.
Yeah, which was a really sharp lesson to me on perspective. Yeah. And we've had the discussion of the 6-9 as well. And so this is another good time to remind people that if you want to talk to me, if you want to give me a call on Ask a Rabbi, it's 772-340-1590. And
Did I hear rumors of a plant sale?
there
or something?
is a plant sale
I've
come
heard
Sunday
that.
and Monday, extended hours, extended days. This one's at the Temple, 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. That's the front building in the West Park office complex, right next to the elevators. And that is Sunday from 1 to 5 and Monday from 11 to 3. So, yeah. You can come and find the plants you've been looking for. We've got lots of gorgeous plants. I was actually just looking at my plants this morning and thinking, you guys are really ready to go to the sale. Got some gorgeous specimens coming.
That's very cool.
So, yeah, lots of different things. Babies from your plant out front they're about yay high now.
Wow.
Yeah, they're doing quite well.
Oh, yeah, our plant out front.
Yeah. Not the one by the door that you forget to water, but
I know. Yeah.
the one outside that
poor
God
thing.
waters.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the one you gave us is resting comfortably in the stomach of one of our little rabbits. But it did last a couple weeks.
They do like those.
Yes,
do
they
like them.
do. They like about everything we've got.
And here's another piece that I have been admonished to remind people, which is that we are looking for sponsors. If you'd like to hear your business or your special whatever mentioned on Ask a Rabbi, please consider sponsoring Ask a Rabbi. You can call the station at that same number, 772-340-1590, and Greg would love to talk to you about sponsoring.
No, Carol would.
Carol would love
I
to
don't
talk to
work
you.
here.
You don't work here. You just talk. Okay.
I just hang out. Yeah, that would be great.
That would be wonderful.
Keep in mind, folks, if you sponsor the show, you'll get spots throughout the week outside the
Right.
show. So,
Not only will I talk about it and we'll have a spot during the show,
That's right.
but you also will have spots during
bet.
the week.
Yep.
So it's a great way to have your special interest or your business mentioned. So yeah, all of that. That's that piece. I'm going to try to do more of that.
Yeah. And especially if you have HR advertising, if you are a business looking for employees, which it seems like everybody is.
Yeah.
We can help you there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is as good a time as any to mention. If there's anybody out there who'd like a great part-time gig, it would be wonderful if we could have some help running our technology during the streaming.
Ooh.
Yeah. And that a student would work if you know how to run streaming and you can help us with the cameras. We'd like to talk to you.
So you video folks at students at IRSC, listen to...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's an every Friday evening.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
maybe a special gig. Well, absolutely a special gig at the High Holy Days and times like that.
Well, if you're a Centennial High School student who's specializing in video, that might be a nice little...
nice little extra thing to earn a little extra money and put
You
it
bet.
on your
resume time.
Yeah, on your resume. It's
Yep.
not a very heavy duty thing, but it needs to be reliable.
Yeah. Good stuff.
So yeah, we'd love to talk to you if you're interested in doing that, because it's one of those things that we do as a volunteer, and somebody who really knows what they're doing could probably do it in a fraction of the time.
Yeah.
And a lot better than what we do. We can always get better. That's one of my other firm beliefs. So, yeah, lots of interesting stuff out there. It is a great time. I brought you a fun thing here, by the way, this is called a bowl koozie. And that's, you put something in it to put in the microwave. It's got the instructions inside.
Oh, wow.
And I've got a bunch of these, and I love them. You put a bowl of something you're heating up in the microwave, and then you just have to grab this because it's warm.
I just use a pot holder. That's a great idea.
Yeah, you put the bowl right in there.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's for you.
Oh, thank you. Wow, that is so cool. Yeah.
I do like. There's all kinds of things like that are just fun. That I have a bunch of those, and I enjoy them. And they weather well.
That'll be perfect for my bowl of soup. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
Oh yeah, this is so cool.
Yeah, it's a clever idea.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives the instructions in there.
A bowl koozie. How about
There you
that?
go.
Huh? Yeah, that.
Either
is
that,
so
or you can
cool.
put it on your head, and it'd be a really strange hat. But
I could. wear the same thing you're wearing. during
Not
the
quite.
show. No. That's terrible. So sacrilegious. Oh, brother.
Well, at least it's red. Never mind. Goes with your shirt.
Oh, actually, it would today. Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah. Lots of, and one of the things that this made me think about is all the little things that we do to make life easier on us. And that's just one of them. There's so many different things out there.
Yeah, you use those in a what? A microwave.
In a microwave, yeah. Something
Wow.
your great-grandmother never knew about.
Yeah, my mother didn't know anything about a microwave oven.
And we've got things that we talk about in language. So again, that thing about being in Israel for a while and being in Germany for a while. Thank you, Uncle Sam. Different things. And Goodyear then took me to Luxembourg. Those were only a week or two at a time.
Ooh.
Luxembourg's a fascinating place.
I'll bet that's got to be beautiful over there.
It is gorgeous. And
Cold, I would imagine. But
I don't remember it being cold particularly, but I do.
well, you're from Ohio, so it's yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. I lived in Ohio back then because I worked at corporate headquarters, but which for Goodyear is in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
So it probably didn't strike me as being very cold. But what it did strike me is how regionalized this little tiny country is. And yet we have some of that going here in Florida. And I talked about the culture in the Middle East and in Israel, and you've got multiple cultures going on there. In fact, a lot of what's going on in Israel in the friction is the wave of European immigration at the end of World War II and the Middle Eastern culture, because they're very different. And if you listen to the Hebrew that's being spoken in a lot of the conflicts, one of the things that you often hear Palestinians saying to Israeli guards is, where were your grandparents born? Were they born in Europe?
What difference does that make?
Well, it's talking about the culture clash. In other words,
okay.
We've been here for generations. You just came back.
You just got here.
You just got here.
Yeah.
Right. Never mind that your ancestors went from here to there and then came back, because we've migrated all over the world. But again, it's a perception, because the European culture of the time and even today is different from what's going on in Israel. And we used to joke during that year that I was in Israel, that the WASPs ran Israel as well. The white Ashkenazi Sabra with Protexia. Okay, let's unpack that. White means pretty much the same thing as it does here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Ashkenaz is a European. Ashkenaz is the word for Eastern Europe in Hebrew. And Sabra is somebody who was born in Israel. Right, so it's the first or second generation Israeli coming from European stock and who has something called protexia, which we would call connections.
Oh, gosh.
Right? Yeah. To know the right people, to be the right family.
Yeah.
And all of that.
Wow.
In the British-style bureaucracy of Israel, because Israel was under the British. We look at them and we say, oh, they spoke English because Britain was here. It's a different English, folks, and it means different things, and they say different things. Like in British English, it's expected that you will knock up your secretary.
Huh?
Because it means get their attention.
Oh, God. Oh, I was going to say, where's the delay button?
It means to hit the door to your secretary's office. Right, and get his or her attention.
Oh, okay.
And it's, because they don't hang up the phone, they ring off.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Right.
Yeah.
And they don't go to the John, they go to the Lou. And it's little differences, because when cultures separate, right? So if we look at English when the first colonialists, I'll get my mouth to work yet. I speak on the radio, right? I speak clearly when my tongue gets unwrapped. The colonialists would have spoken British English when they came. There was no such thing as American English until people started to live here for a while and were born here. And
Queen's English.
it was the Queen's English. And there are dialects even within English all over the world because of the places that Britain has been. And American English is an offshoot of the Queen's or the King's English. And it reflects our life here in America with the immigrants that have come into America. Every wave of immigration changes America dramatically, and we change the country from which those people emigrated, because not all families immigrate together. They often leave family behind, and there's communication back and forth, and then there's a mixing. And the more trade we do and the more travel we do, the more homogenized, or at least exposed to different things people become. There's another favorite one, another question that I ask my students at first class. I'll ask, how many people speak 2 or more languages? And usually some small number of hands will go up. And I'll turn to those people and I'll say, can you translate from English to your other language, word for word? And a couple of them may say, yeah, I can do that, or something. But many of them will immediately say no, and they're correct. A couple of them will say, yeah, I can do it. I said, okay, translate for me, he is sharp. John is sharp. And then I get this really nasty look, because which meaning of sharp do I mean?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right? The translator has to make a decision. Think about that when we're doing things like on-the-spot translation at the UN.
Courts.
And courts and other places. Some of those words don't, there's multiple meanings, and the translator has to guess from the context which of those meanings you mean.
Yeah.
And they're different depending on what is said and what is written, because we have homophones and homonyms and all of those other things.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I say hair, am I talking H-A-R-E, the little brown fuzzy thing with ears outside, or am I talking the stuff that is poorly cut on my head? They sound the same, and if I'm doing a verbal translation, I might not catch which one is which. We get it from context.
I got a question as far as the origin of the yarmulke.
That's a really good question. Because among other, there's my friends, the Zoroastrians. They have a code. Yeah, they have a code of having your head covered.
That far back. Wow.
And, certainly a lot of the I think the Egyptians covered their heads as well. Greeks, not so much. Yeah. And that would be part of why Christianity doesn't cover the head, is the Greco-Roman influence.
Wow.
Right. When you look at Middle Eastern, African, and even Asian countries, you see more head coverings than you see in Europe.
Orthodox religions, you see.
Yeah,
coverings.
You see head coverings.
Whoa.
And even popes and bishops.
Oh, well, sure. Yeah.
Right? Because they carried some of that out.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot more influence going up and down than we realize. It's interesting that the monastic orders come out of Asia. There's nothing monastic in Judaism. There are no monks and nuns. We want our teachers married and in the culture. We don't want them cloistered.
Well, that debate's been going on in the Catholic Church forever. Yeah.
And if you look at the garb of monks and nuns, it looks a lot more Asian and Middle Eastern than people like to think. There's not a whole lot of difference between the nun's old habit and a hijab.
No, it's very close.
They're very close.
Yeah.
Much closer than people realize. Again, that was brought home to me when I went down to Peru to do a wedding, and it struck me at the airport how many nuns were in habits. Because here in the U.S., the American nuns don't wear the habits very much.
Yeah, that's gone away, unfortunately.
It's gone.
I like that.
Yeah, well, it made it easier to know who was a nun in the crowd.
You see a penguin around, you know it's a
Yeah.
nun. Yeah.
So there's a lot in the world in the way of perspective, and it's what makes travel interesting, and it's something that a lot of kids don't get exposed to except on videos and things like that, which do package bits and pieces of culture. But a mindset is also a function of the language in which you speak. So I will give you a very famous quote. I am the life and the resurrection, right? The resurrection and the life. I apologize. It's sometimes I get that backwards because it's not my scripture. And people will say to me, "Well, you need to read the Bible," and of course they're referring to New Testament Christian scriptures. And when I quote that quote, I'm much more likely to say, I am is the life and the resurrection. Oh, why do I stick is in there? Because it is very, very likely, right? God says to Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I am that I am, or I will be what I will be, is actually a bitter. I will be what I will be. What you have to recognize in language culture, the verb to be in Hebrew is not used in the present tense. So if I say, this koozie, which is what this funny red thing is called, is on the table. It's what I say in English, is on the table.
Yeah.
In Hebrew, it's the koozie, the table. And you understand from the context that what I'm saying is that the koozie is on the table.
Wow. Okay.
The koozie on the table.
Huh.
And so it is, and it was not unusual for people to refer to God as Ehyeh, one of God's names. You would use that. I will be what I will be. Or I am what I am.
Mm-hmm.
The great I am. And, Hebrew probably had the verb is understood in there, because that would make sense. That would make a lot of sense for Jesus to say, God is the staff of life.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And, it was an easy name to use because you would not have used Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, that name for God, in everyday language on the street. You would have used one of God's other names, Adonai, Ehyeh, Havaya. There's a ton of different names that you would use. Hashem is another one. There's lots of words that are used to represent God in everyday language, in Hebrew and in Aramaic. And the problem when it goes to Greek and Latin, it doesn't translate perfectly, word for word. Because how do you know to include a word that isn't there?
Wow.
Right. And the other thing that I love is that when people say, well, Jesus came up with love your neighbor. It's in the middle of the book of Leviticus, folks. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. In fact, we've got it in our service. It's at the very beginning. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You will love your neighbor as you love yourself. Don't you love the ch in the mic?
Yeah. I like that. Yeah.
All right, so those are common things. The other thing that Jesus says is, Hear, O Israel. And what he's doing by that, folks, is that he's identifying himself, is everybody ready for this, as a Pharisee. Because that's what the Pharisees taught, that God is love. Okay. There's always been this dichotomy, and it is through all cultures, of do you do the letter of the law or do you do the spirit of the law? There's always this tension. Right? Which one do you focus in on? And it's time, I see, to say 772-340-1590. Can you tell I've been reminded to do that, and also to remind folks that if you'd like to sponsor and Ask the Rabbi.
Do we have a rock and roll clock
We
up
do
there?
have a rock and roll clock that's saying that, yeah. So, yeah, if you'd like to do that, please contact the station. If you'd like to ask me a question, please do so. So if you look at things like that, it's one of the courses that I offer, and we're going to be offering it this year actually through the temple, which is the Jewish understanding of Christian scriptures. It's a fun look to I think, but that's me, to go through, because the early Gospels were written by Jews for Jews, because that's who the early followers of Jesus would have been, was Jews. There were not yet Christians. They don't start calling themselves that for a while. It's not until the concept of Christos and Jesus get married or become one.
You say a while. Is that
Couple of hundred years.
Decades?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
100 years.
It's a while. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a while. Recognize, right, Paul never knew Jesus. Paul never met Jesus. Right? He meets disciples in the church, in the Jerusalem church, which of course did not survive the sacking of Jerusalem that the Romans did in 67 to 70. And we're right in that time period. We're coming into the month of Tammuz. Tammuz and Av are the times of the calendar when we remember, the Jews remember, the destruction of the temple by the Romans.
Yeah, they weren't great people.
You know, they were looking out for Romans.
Yep.
It has to do with how big your we is. And in those days, in Rome, there was a huge difference between the Roman elite, the lower Roman citizens, and then all the folks who lived throughout the empire who were not citizens, who had nothing.
Interesting. Yeah. And, you know, you think about what ISIS did to a lot of those religious areas. And you think about what the Romans did.
Everybody's done it.
Yeah.
Everybody's done it. And it's so sad, because that information would help us have a better perspective on other things that have gone on and happened. And yeah, we lose a piece of our history when somebody goes and desecrates things like that. Yeah. So here's another piece of language. Understanding language. Who gets released by Pilate? Barabbas, yeah. Bar Abba, the son of the father.
Oh.
So obviously there's other folks running around.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Huh.
But, you know, and that's another interesting piece. If you look at Christian scripture, if you look at the early gospel, Simon is called Kineas. Simon Kineas. Doesn't become Simon Zelotus, the zealot, until you get to John. His name changes over time. Kineas means zealot. But it was too close to the 67-70 revolution, when zealots were considered to be the thorn in the side, that you wouldn't have wanted to have had one of them in Jesus's band. But of course it makes absolute sense for Jesus to have had somebody like that. People don't recognize, again, the apostles, maybe you've noticed, the apostles are not the brightest lights on the tree, as you might say, right? The sharpest blades in the drawer. They're just not. They're very common, everyday people. Why? Because Jesus, as any good leader, needs a group that he or she can test the ideas on. And the story of the loaves and the fish is a perfect example of that. The text says that he asked one of the disciples, "What should we do? We don't have enough money to buy food for everybody." And there's a little line in the story. It says he asked that because he already knew what he was going to do. In other words, he wants to see if the common folk are going to understand what he's going to get, if he's going to be able to make this clear to the people. And there's a lot of wonderful pieces in that story of the loaves and the fish. And I don't have enough time left in 10 minutes to really unpack that story. It takes me about 20 minutes. But the piece that's in there, it says and you have to realize that in Jesus's day, and even in the hundreds of years later, when the Gospels are written, the people who wrote the Gospels did not know Jesus. They knew the stories of Jesus because they're written with events and names that didn't exist. For example, if I told you that in 1902 I was standing in the courtyard at Port St. Lucie, you'd know that wasn't true because Port St. Lucie wasn't Port St. Lucie back then. It was some kind of creek or something and not many homes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's how you know when something happens. If I reference Port St. Lucie in a document, you know that it has to be after 1985. And that kind of is the way we date the Gospels, is according to the names and other things like that. But there's a line in there. In those days, they wrote it by hand, so they're not going to put anything in that isn't absolutely necessary, because scribes are lazy too. And one of the things that it says in there is that it was the time of the Passover. Okay, now why is that important? Because one of the things of Passover is, in fact, the Passover meal. And in scriptures it is explained that you sit down in groups that can finish a lamb at one sitting. And if your family group isn't large enough, you combine with another small group. It's that scriptures goes through that description. And what does Jesus do with the loaves and the fish? He puts the people down in 50s and hundreds. And again, we don't know that those numbers mean, 49, 50. Oh, I'm sorry, your kid has got to go in the next group. It's approximate numbers in small and large groups.
Right.
And then what does he do? It's right there in the story. He holds up a piece of bread and he says, "Thank you, God, for this bread." And once you say that blessing, you have to eat the bread. And so what's going to happen in the circles when he does that? Yeah. Right. So it's an interesting piece. And let me ask this question of everybody. We've got food in more abundance in America than any other country that I know. And we've got food at levels that previous generations did not know. How many of us have some amount of food within hand's reach that you packed and brought with you or carried into the classroom? I do this in my religion class, right? How many of you have a snack or something? How far do you have to go to get food? The vending machines are right there in every building.
Vending machines.
Yeah, but people pack things.
Yeah.
Now imagine if you were a couple of thousand years ago and you were going to go out and you've got children. You're certainly not going to go without food. So this is one of the things that is really important, I think, to Jesus, which was to teach people to share. That if you hoard, then, imagine there might be empty shelves for people and there won't be enough. But if we share what we have, then everyone will get through the pandemic, the hurricane, whatever.
When we were in Kansas with the IRSC basketball team, and I was talking to our handler, who was the DA in that town, and asked him, I said, we passed a lot of fields that were just plowed over. Mm-hmm. And he said, oh, yeah, they're not growing this year.
They're paid to not grow.
Yeah. And there's a lot of farms like that in Kansas.
Yeah, there's a lot of farms throughout America. And that's a supply and demand kind of thing. The goal is good, I think, and that is to make sure that farmers earn a livable wage by keeping the supply low. The other, to me, better approach would be let them go ahead and farm it and buy it up at the market price and
give it to the less fortunate.
Well, or give it overseas or whatever, somewhere. If we grew what this planet can grow safely, and I'm going to say safely because a lot of the farming is not safe, but if we could grow what we can grow safely, there is enough food to feed all of the human beings on the planet. There is no excuse to have people who are food insecure. That is the fault, to me, of the society.
Yeah.
That's our inability to share appropriately. One of my long-term goals when we have a building God willing, soon, is to actually have a space, and we call it take what you need, give what you can, buy what you want. So that people can have the basic needs. And a lot of us have surplus. Like right now, there's a fair amount of mangoes in my backyard and my neighbor's yard. And
you've been feeding a lot of us.
Yeah. Had I not been so late, you'd have gotten more today.
Oh,
next week. And, yeah. So we've got enough food. We know how to produce incredible amounts of food. We know how to have plants produce incredible amounts of food. Okay. And, there's all kinds of stuff going on in the food industry. It is an industry that people need to take a serious, hard, candid look at. Because in 1940, the U.S. government declared that the soils in America were depleted and that our produce was not giving us some of the things that we needed for nutrition. And we're seeing that in deteriorating health as time goes on because the soils have not gotten better. We put back in nitrogen and a couple of other things to make the plants grow, but unless we vary our crops and do some other things, conservation things, we don't get the trace elements back into the soil for the plants to pick up, and we need some of those things.
But you said the study was in 1940?
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
And we haven't gotten better.
Wasn't
We've gotten good at making things grow. You know it as well as I do. There's a lot of very beautiful fruit that's mostly water.
Yeah?
Right? The taste is not there like it was when you or I were kids. The produce, unless you get it at an organic farm, not usually anywhere near what it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when we were visiting the kids up in Spokane and we'd go to those stands, apple stands. Mm-hmm. They were so much better up there than they are in a grocery store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was when we lived in California. I was thoroughly spoiled as a kid in California because what we did was take a watermelon, cut it in half, and you ate the core out. When you hit the seeds, you threw out the rest of the watermelon. So to me, the taste of the stuff near the rind is like, okay, what can I say? Yeah.
So the service times are when?
7:30 on a Friday, and this Friday is alternative Shabbat, which means we do something a little bit different. We do that on second and fourth Fridays, and then traditional services on first and third, and we'll decide what we're going to do with the fifth Shabbat this month. We've got an extra one, so it's always more fun. So, yeah, please look for us on Facebook. Our website needs to be updated, so I won't give that website now. But we're at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast, Congregation Eitz Chayim. And this has been Rabbi Lobb for Ask a Rabbi.
You're listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. Talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world.